If you don't know how to read side banks and kind of know where that structure is, same thing in the surf. If you don't know where the trough is, or you don't know where, the rip is forming, you could stand there all day and be a half a block away, or you could be they could be right in front of you on the side bank, but if your casting angle isn't correct and your retrieve speed is not what it needs to be, you could stand there all day and have them in front of you, and you'll just never hook up.
Hello and welcome back to the Fat Dad Fishing Show. My name's Rich Natoli. I'm your regular host, and this week we have for you a throwback episode. An episode actually from November 2021, where we had Chris Matuson come on and we talked about sod and surf striped bass fishing. Called it a 101 issue because we talked a lot of education, a lot of information that's going to help you be more productive for striped bass fishing from land. This is one of the lost episodes, and it's well worth putting back out there for you. So make sure you're ready for some information on this one. Before we get into that, we're going to hit the sponsors real quick. We have Great Bay Outfitters on Radio Road in Tuckerton, New Jersey. That's your source, my number one source for anything kayak fishing related. Everything from new kayaks to used kayaks to accessories to fit outs. If you want to test a kayak on the water to see if it's the right fit for you, head down to Great Bay Outfitters. Tell Paul what you're looking for. He will put them in the water, in the lagoon, and you can test them out and get a feel for them in real life, in real time, so you will know what the best fit is for you. And if you have a Toyota truck, Quad State Tuned, Kevin Driscoll is your man. If you're looking for getting more performance out of the engines on these Toyota trucks, the Tacoma, the Lexus, they all have great engines, but they can be better. These engine tunes will get you better performance, better torque, better horsepower, better mileage. Reach out to Kevin Driscoll. Contact information is in the description of this podcast. And the final sponsor is me, Rich Natoli Real Estate with Weicker Cornerstone Realtors in Bluebell and Collegeville, residential real estate in southeastern Pennsylvania. If you need something, buy, sell, or invest, I'm your guy. Reach out to me. Let me do some work for you. That's how I pay my bills. And I appreciate all of the support I've been getting from everyone over the years. It is thanks to everybody for your business and your referrals that I'm able to continue doing this podcast and continue to eat at night and pay my bills. So thank you to everybody for that. Please support the sponsors. And with that, we're not going to wait. We're going to jump in back to this throwback episode from 2021 and Chris Matuson.
Chris, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here,
Chris. Very happy that you're on. I'm going to tell people really the origin story of how you got here and what my perspective is on this episode. So I have seen Chris online through Sod Pigs, which is a page that he runs on Facebook, and it was all about, I think Steve V told me, hey, you got to check out this page, and I checked it out, and man, for a couple of years, maybe it's even been 3 years that I've been following that, and I keep seeing Chris out there, and I'm banging the sod, and he's pulling out some solid fish, and I'm thinking this guy knows what he's doing, and I really wanted Chris to come on, but my first thought was, Chris, this is a guy who's clinical about his fishing. Like, right. You're into the detail. I mean, you can just tell by the posts and the results. Like, you are studying striped bass. You're studying the areas that you're in. You're studying the conditions. And I wasn't sure if you would be willing to share anything with anyone else, because there's there's that big time on the water thing. And some people are like, no, just go out. But I learned over the past couple of years that you're probably the opposite. You won't tell them this spot, but you will really tell people, hey, these are the things that you want to look for. And it looks like you're interested in getting responsible fishermen onto the fish so that they can get out there and enjoy themselves.
Yeah, I think the biggest part for me is, I've put a lot of time in, especially over the last 5 years, doing just the sod bank thing. And I just don't do fall or spring. It's one of those from March 1st all the way through December. We catch them on the side, and there's been a lot of work put into that, and a lot of technique, a lot of prep, and I've talked about that before, how much prep goes into it. But I mean, I just live and breathe this, and it's just something. It's a huge passion of mine, and I'm already thinking right now about my next outing and how we're going to go about that. So, no, I mean, listen, I had guys help me out along the way and, point me to a spot or two. But, I think when you really, really get a chance to go out on your own, which I very seldom fish with anybody, and it's not really because of the spot burn thing. I mean, most of the guys that I do fish with, they're just as protective of areas as I am. It's just more about kind of just sharing a little bit of information, because I know I had a tough go of it for a while, but once certain things start to click and you see patterns develop year after year, and for certain areas, it's, when you put that initial work in, it's okay. But, I've spent years, months out of the year, not as a waste of time, but, I really, really pick my spots when to go now. Sometimes I won't go for weeks at a time because I don't like the moon, or I just don't like certain tide heights on certain side banks. But, I've learned to fish smarter now and not harder. Not that we don't fish hard, but, a lot of those days of just going out just to go, I kind of don't do a whole lot of that anymore.
Right.
I just really pick those really prime opportunities and target those. And I've been really, really, really successful. And this year was definitely one of those years, especially midsummer, was fantastic for me. So,
I think you bring up an interesting point. So the time on the water is a big thing, but I think you look at time on the water a little bit differently. I know I do. And I actually have a video where I say time on the water doesn't matter. And what I'm claiming in that is, people say, just go out and fish and put in your time. Well, it has to be productive time, right?
Correct.
If you're just going to go down and you're going to hit one sod bank and you're going to fish it through every tide for 8 hours, 12 hours, that's putting in time, but that's the wrong kind of time, right? You need to understand what you're looking for, and you need to make the most of the time that you have out there.
Yeah, I think that I believe that that's kind of pointless. I mean, I don't really go much more than an hour and a half. That's usually my window. My window is probably even smaller than that, maybe like 40 minutes. I know, right? But see, I'm lucky because the furthest spot I fish is about 12 minutes from my house. So, I got it made. The location I live right outside Summers Point, between Summers Point and Egg Harbor Township border. But, many days, years ago, out there for 2, 3, 4 hours, and you say, oh, man, here yesterday, I'm just, if I throw long enough, something is going to show up. And that's, sometimes that's the case. But, I've found that year after year, if I just choose these certain windows and certain locations, they tend to pay off. And, I used to kind of get, not uptight, but, antsy about going, like, oh, man, let me just go just to go. Well, now I'll occupy myself with something else, either with my cars, or I'll find another activity, because that I used to go at low tide. That's a great time to go, to really kind of check out the water, look at the flats, see, where they're structured. But yeah, small windows, and that's it. But I agree, back to your point about the time on the water. A lot of that can be wasted time.
Right.
So, I see guys that, they're out there. I've been out here 4 hours and haven't had a touch. Well, I don't know why you're still out there after 4 hours, because 4 hours, I'm already home doing another activity, or I'm back in bed or whatnot. But, like this summer, there were times where there was a 20-minute window, and 20 minutes it happens, it shuts down, and I go back the next day, just follow the tide another hour later for 20 minutes. And that's that. I mean, I obviously enjoy it enough where I could stay out there for hours, but I'd rather go back to Pennsylvania and trout fish all day if I'm going to spend all day on the water. Right. Down here, when you're going to, you're lugging a sod bank in the middle of summer when it's 95 degrees, I'm not baking out there for 3 hours, nor, is that window going to last that long, especially, when the water's hot and fish are finicky. But yeah, you got to put the time in. But I spent a lot of dumb time for a couple of years, and I wish I would have had that time back and fished a little smarter. So
yeah, I think we've all had our share of dumb time. Ed, you have any dumb time in your recent past?
Recently, yeah, I spent a couple hours chasing some stripers that weren't there, or just I wasn't throwing the right thing.
Yeah,
but it's all learning. I take it as a learning experience, especially having the tackle company and stuff. If I don't catch, then I'm at least learning, ways to work the lures and change up my presentation, and maybe I will catch something. So,
and what
for me, it's not so much wasted.
Yeah. I'm the different type, Chris. I'm in Pennsylvania, and you've mentioned some people in the past and on social media. So I know you fish with a lot of Pennsylvania guys.
Right.
So, for me, it's an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, depending on what time of year it is. So
Yep.
when I'm going down, I'm down for the day, and I'm usually
Sure.
on the water 8 to 12 hours.
Right.
I get my one day a week, but what I do is I try to be smart about it. So I went out this past weekend with my buddy Derek, and he wanted to go for striper. I was like, it's not going to be great with that south wind. Now, the wind didn't end up being where it was supposed to be, but
Right.
so we fished for striper early, and then we hit tog for a while. And then I said, okay, before this wind really kicks up, let's hit these spots, which should be decent for midday striped bass.
Yep.
And we didn't get a touch, and then we got blasted by the wind and everything. But, that to me was, the striped bass was not going to be a striped bass day at all. It just, the conditions just weren't right for the area that we were going to be in.
And those are probably the days that I pass on now. Like if the conditions are just that bad and it's just not going to, I don't look for ideal conditions, but if it's just definitely not going to happen based on, some of the wind that we've had the last couple of weeks, especially out front in the surf, the wind has just been horrendous. And I was talking to a buddy yesterday, and, there's so many missed opportunities this fall. The tide was right, lined up with dusk or dawn, whatever the case was, good rips, same thing in the back, but the wind has just played havoc. But the last couple of years, though, wind has been a problem, especially in the spring. I love some wind because I definitely believe some of the best striped bass fishing is when you have, especially in the back on the flat, is when you have some chop.
Right.
In the summer, it's imperative because just still dead water with no oxygen going through it, when the water's 80 some degrees, they tend not to come up and feed in that shallow water. But we had a couple of days in August where we had those mid-afternoon tornado warnings, and fishing for me was lights out. I went to a spot that is a good May and June producer for me when you still got some migratory fish coming along front, but they'll also come through the bay. And same spot, I went and tried it in August, and usually that spot shuts down by the second week of June, but it produced all summer this year, and I wound up getting some nice 35, 37-inch fish. 95 degrees. Yeah, heat index was 98 degrees. Sun out, and this is one of the best. This Yo-Zuri Hydro Minnow has changed the game. Before it was just the SP. Well, this one here with the fatter profile, and it swims shallower.
Yeah.
When I can't do a spook or a Tactor Anglers crossover or a hydro from Yo-Zuri, that's the go-to right below the surface. And all summer, that lure was lights out with the biggest fish. It's crazy how great it was. And like at top speed as fast as you could crank it with a 15-mile-an-hour east wind in your face. It was crazy. But that lure is fantastic. But there's a spot that let's go back 4 years ago. You couldn't go wrong for like a 5-week period in the spring, late spring. It was just a really good producer. Nobody around because it's a far away spot. I've yet to see one person around except guys that, are really diehards that kind of know, where to go out there. But was really good for a couple of years. And then the last 2 years, I really didn't do anything there. I went back the last couple of springs and nothing. Last year, not a touch. And something told me this year, hey, you know what? Other spots been producing good. Let's check this out again. And last week of May, same thing. It was just, it was nuts. The more the wind blew in, the higher that tide came for a 45 to a 50-minute window. I had a buddy out there with me, and they were just, if you were throwing a spook, that's all they wanted. He was throwing poppers. They weren't touching it. I was throwing a spook. It was every cast. And we're talking, some fish were 35, 37 inches. Average size was probably 28 to 30. And I definitely hooked a couple fish that were over 40 inches probably. But they were hooked in, they were sitting in these little cuts and these little coves. And with the casting angle, when you set the hook and they run a certain way. You just
Yeah.
couldn't get, you couldn't keep them on. But yeah, I mean, Back Bay is just a lot of boots on the ground. But I grew up fishing freshwater, trout streams. And what I've learned is a lot of that stuff rolls over into bass, ambush points,
Yep.
current, eddies. So, I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day. He's like, "Oh, my uncle wants to fish with you. Can I give him your number?" Well, sure, we could fish together, but it's, when you start putting certain factors together, to me, I think it's better when you figure it out yourself. I mean, yeah, we could hang out, and I'll show you a couple of things, but when you kind of go back to when you're a kid, and I remember where my father used to take me, and certain places we would fish for trout, and certain places they would sit behind rocks or, below a fast water chute or some rapids and stuff. And, I use the same stuff when I look for bass spots, and it's really the same. It's no different.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, they forget that, right? And especially I think with striper, they think, well, they're migrating, so it's all luck. Okay, there is some luck. You have to be if you're, especially if you're on the beach. In the back, though, it's to me in the back it's a little bit different. First of all, they're there all year. Doesn't mean you can catch them all year, but they're there. But you have to remember, even the migrating fish, they're not just going straight up and down the coast. They're following bunker pods. They're feeding as they're migrating. So what's going to draw the bunker in, or the bait fish, or the mullet, especially in, if you're on the surf, where's the cut? You got to look for where the bait fish are going to be, because they're going to ambush them. They are ambush predators. Right. They're going to come. They're going to look for everything they can use. They're very inclined to structure. I mean, they're called rockfish in other areas for a reason. It's because they love the structure, they love the ambush, and people need to approach it that way. If you can catch a flounder, and you know why you're catching a flounder in a certain spot, not just drifting the middle of a channel, but how to find spots, you will be able to find out where a striped bass is. You will be able to find out where weak fish are. The same thing with bass and trout, right? I mean, there are reasons that they're there. And I think that's, to your point, though, it's great, it's great when you can find it on your own and you can say, wait, this should work, and here's why, and then you get to test it. So I definitely appreciate that about fishing. And I very, very rarely engage in conversations where it's like, well, just tell me where you went so I can go there.
Right.
Now, a lot of people ask me that, but, I try to, even in my videos, I'm like, it's not the spot. They're like, was it here? I'm like, it doesn't matter. Just look at what I'm telling you. Look at how the bottom is. Find bottom like that next to this type of point, and you're going to find the fish. It doesn't matter where I was at that point.
Yeah, and I think reading that structure is probably the number one key. You could talk tides, we could talk wind and all that, but if you don't know how to read side banks and kind of know where that structure is, same thing in the surf. If you don't know where the trough is, or you don't know where, the rip is forming, you could stand there all day and be a half a block away, or they could be right in front of you on the side bank. But if your casting angle isn't correct and your retrieve speed is not what it needs to be, you could stand there all day and have them in front of you, and you'll just never hook up. So, reading the structure, I can't stress the importance enough of that. But, a lot of the banks that I go on, there are certain techniques that work, and there are certain ones that don't. I mean, I was telling you about the spook, and, my buddy was throwing, a ton of other stuff. Those fish were right there. They were right there in front of us. Some of them were, 30 some inch fish were maybe 10 feet off the bank. And, he was cast after cast after cast, nothing. And, you throw that spook out there and it was getting busted every time. You got to look at the way the current comes around the side bank. I mean, it's no secret that, points are obviously, a good spot on an outgoing tide. I mean, that's been commercialized for years now. Hey, hit a side bank at outgoing tide, and that's the ticket. Well, there's a little more to it than that. I mean, if it was that easy, everybody would be out there doing it regardless of the conditions. And, I think there's bass on every bank, but I mean, they're not going to be around the entire bank. They're a lot of times just going to be staged up in certain spots, and, you just need to know how to read it. But the self-gratification thing of finding it on your own, that's the that's the great thing for me, is being able to do that and still continuing to do that. And even if it's not straight bass, if I'll be back down in Dominican Republic next week fishing for tarpon and snook again down there. And, I found this bite a couple years ago and I knew they were there, but my first time fishing for them was a little difficult. I just kept throwing certain lures. But I mean, once I figured it out, it's a ridiculous experience. But a lot of the techniques I use there is the same thing I use for striped bass up here. The lures the lures don't change.
Right.
They're exactly the same. Some of the areas I fish, especially for snook down there in the surf or back on the landlocked ones, same thing with the, current, coves, cuts, drop offs, anywhere there's cover. But, the striped bass thing just is gotten really big in this area. That's a good thing, because I think it just, I like to see people out fishing. I like to see people, it's a great pastime and a great enjoyment to have. But, I think we need a little more conservation also, especially in the back, because that's one reason, honestly, why I don't talk about it too much. And a few years ago, I started talking to some people. I would do a post or two or a photo, and I got blasted for it a couple of times. Say, hey, do you understand the impact of this? And it only took me maybe one season to figure out the impact, because you just see every year now the decline
Right.
in the back bay. Again, migratory fish, if you're out in a boat, Raritan Bay, you're going to say, hey, what are you talking about? Shortage? There's no shortage. I mean, it's lights out up here. If you're on the borderline in New York, no, there's no shortage of big fish up here. And well, those are fish that, a lot of those are centralized in that area. A lot of the migratory fish, I mean, they're, like you were talking about bunker pods. I mean, there's a ton of bait up there. That's one thing we lack down here right now is bait. So that's one reason where it's tough to draw them in. But, if everybody was able to do this and be successful all the time, the people think the back bay is wiped out now. It would be totally wiped out. I mean,
Right.
It's, I haven't kept a fish in, I want to say, probably 3.5 years. I caught 2 back-to-back 37-inch bass the end of July 3 years ago. The second one I couldn't revive and was kind of hooked kind of bad. So that one had to be sacrificed. But other than that, I haven't kept a bass in 20 years, and I don't have any desire to. I just think that they're worth more swimming away than they are putting them on the table. And again, I have a lot of disagreements with people about that. Oh, what's the matter with providing for your family? I don't know. Go eat something else. I mean, striper tastes good, but it's not worth, to me, sacrificing the stock that we do have. I was seeing some posts the other day, and live spot is a really good bait for right now in the back bay. And the water gets cold. You have these cold fronts that get down in the deeper water, and it's great, man. They're out there catching a lot of fish, but we're also sacrificing a lot of fish with this bonus tag program and everything else. And there's no wardens out anymore. I mean, you don't see any game wardens out. You see like maybe 3 stories a year that get posted on Facebook of guys that were caught poaching or over limit or whatever. If we had more of that, maybe some of it would stop. But there's spots in December that I see every night I drive by, and there's guys fishing in those bread baskets up on top of bridges. And in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong. People are different. There's only one reason why you're fishing there. You're catching dinks out of the channel, and they're getting hauled all the way up, and they're putting them in bags and they're taking them away. So I mean,
yeah, they're running them into the trunk of the car. And I actually, I think it was last summer. It wasn't this summer. I ran into a New Jersey conservation officer for the first time in my life. Mm-hmm. I'm 48, and since I was born, I've been going to Stone Harbor up until the past couple of years. Never once did I ever meet in person or see in person a conservation officer. Guy came up to me and I was so excited. Crazy. I said, you want to see my registry? He's like, no. I was like, oh, you want to check my fish? He's like, did you catch any? I was like, yeah. And he's like, congrats. He's like, I'm not here for you. He's like, who around here is not doing what they're supposed to do? I said, you know what? I'm not sure. I just got my kayak out of the water. I said, but you might want to check over there because they got a minivan and twice somebody's come back to it with something. and he was down there for a while. So I think he found some people pulling it, and they were using a cast net. So
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I just don't. And in the river, it's the same way in the spring. I mean, in March and April, when you got the schoolies that are starting to bite, you can't tell me all those fish are being released either. I mean, I fished the Great Egg Harbor River a lot, and compared to 25 years ago, we don't get any run up there compared to what we used to have. And whether that's because of fish depletion or maybe they just don't run up there as spawn anymore. I don't know. We outlawed, we can't live line herring anymore. Not that I ever really did it that much, but they say, oh, well, there's a herring shortage.
Right.
So we don't have as many fish going up there to, chasing bait to. Listen, there's no herring shortage. I've seen herring the last couple of years that, you could walk across the Great Egg Harbor River from one side to the other on it. And not, we're talking, herring that are, they're big sized.
They're huge.
So yeah, there's no shortage of those. I mean, I did get one about a 30-pound bass 2 years ago out of there on a plug, like 2 feet in front of me, just whaled a Yo-Zuri broken back that I was, so great fish, like up on the flat. But other than that, I mean, I haven't caught many fish out of the river, over 30, 35 inches. And, I'm out there a lot in the spring, and I'm out there at a really, really good private spot that I go out there with a buddy of mine. And again, years ago, it was kind of lights out, but now it's, you got to put a lot of extra work in. And, a lot of us put a lot of that time on the water. So, do we want to share that? No. Do we want to, there's enough of fish to go around. I don't really believe that either. So you kind of just keep it tight to the cuff, and, you don't give too much out. But, I know there's a lot of, younger anglers that, they want to get started in fishing, and they go and, they don't catch anything, and they get burned down and say, oh, no, I don't catch anything. I don't even want to go fishing. So, if we can help a couple people and just, talk about some lures and, kind of just things to look for. I mean, that's kind of what I try to do now, and just kind of give some generic information. Cause I mean, I wasn't really given detailed information, and, I made the mistake of asking a few guys back years ago, hey, where did you go? I really caught a tough time. But again, I wasn't doing it enough at that point, because I did the bodybuilding thing for like 20 years. I kind of got away from fishing for a long time. But when I got hurt, 5 years ago, I had to give that up. So, I really got back into this heavy. But in that time gap, you went from really, really, really good fishing to like this horrible depletion, which we see now. Then I understood, they're like, listen, this is not the way it was before. So we're not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about spots. We're not going to talk about, a whole lot of anything. But, the stock definitely is a problem. But, we definitely need to do things to fix that. Because I'm afraid in another 4 or 5 years, we're going to be in really, really bad shape back in the bay. And, that's flounder's another issue. We talk about, you go out, catch 50 flounder, right? And you got 3 legal size ones there. Why is that? Is that because there's just a shortage of adult flounder? Is there a shortage because, people kept everything at one time? I don't know. Weak fish is the same way. In the late 90s,
devastated. Yeah.
The late 90s, I mean, you could go off any side bank. Well, the smaller ones are. I mean, but we could, in the late 90s, early 2000s, we could go on any side bank from Long Beach Island, down way past where I live. And, 8, 9, 10 pounders, schools of them were not rare at that point. Yeah. Even in the surf, wasn't bad to go out there and catch a couple, or in the inlets. A couple years ago, I got one, she was dead for a couple hours and that wasn't a striped bass. So it's keeping the one fish in 20 years. The weak fish is the exclusion. But that was 30 and a half inches and 8 pounds. That was after she was dead for a couple hours. But you don't see weak fish that size.
No.
So the spikes are kind of making a comeback. But again, that one fish limit. But a lot of people I see catching those spikes is, got that one fish. How much are you really getting off of that one fish? So to me, sacrificing that fish, to me, I just don't get it. I have a spot in September that I go every year, and I can get bass, flounder, and weak fish all mixed in together. It's a nice little tidal pool. I could see other people fishing, but they kind of don't bother with me, and they probably think, oh, this guy's all the way out there. He's really not getting anything. But really, it's the opposite. There's maybe a half hour, 40-minute window on certain moons, and it produces real well. And I've never thought about keeping a weak fish. Last year, I got one 25, 26 inches. I never thought about keeping it. This year, one night I got into a nice school of them, every single one back in the water. So maybe it's just mentality. Maybe I'm wrong. But I just don't see the logic in all that. I don't get it.
I think it has to do with the angler and the ethics that they're even raised with. You see people,
Right.
When they're doing their poaching thing and whatever, you see little kids involved. So they learn it from a young age.
Right.
I think people that do that kind of stuff, they're just not on the up and up to begin with. So they're just going to do whatever they want.
And like trout fishing, we were a kid. I mean, we were always, when I go with my father, we'd always keep our limit and, go home, cook them up. Even when my first couple of years after I moved down here after high school, I still go back there and fish every year. And for a while, we were still keeping fish, bringing them, eating them. But I just got old after a while. I mean, you saw that every year they started stocking less. It was harder and harder to catch. So it's like, hey, you know what? If I could put these couple back in and they turn out to, stay in here for a couple more years, grow a little bit bigger, give somebody else some pleasure of catching them. I mean, that's kind of the satisfaction I get now. I posted a lot of videos this year of a lot of fish being released, and, you slow motion them and you get the big tail wave and, they're splashing out of the water. I mean, I just, there's something in me that kind of went off maybe 10 or 15 years ago that I just love to release fish. I just think it's just such a, hey, you did me a solid. You got on the end of my line. You gave me a good 5 or 10 minutes, and, here's the way I pay you back. And now I let you go to swim another day. I mean, obviously some fish get, they get foul hooked or bad hooked. I mean, that's just kind of, the way nature runs. But, we talk about that bonus pet tag program. A lot of guys I know, they'll buy those tags and not use them just to, because there's only a certain number that are given out. But, I don't know. Certain bait shops, they promote all that and whatever. But at the same time, I look at it as, well, that's great. You need to make a business, but if you're helping to deplete the population, well, that's only going to hurt you in the long run. But I think it's just more about that immediate gratification and sales. And I'm friends with just about every bait shop owner. So, I mean, they run their business the way they run it, but that's a tough pill for me to swallow. And that's a lot of why I fish alone too, is I don't want to see people keeping fish. Certain areas I just don't go to. They produce real well, but I'd rather go out by myself and just do the experience that way. I just don't want to see, those fish being killed at this point, especially bass. So,
yeah, I think I keep about one bass a year. It's usually because I hooked it bad and it didn't revive.
Yep. And you're also driving 2 hours to come down and fish 8 hours. So it's okay then at that point.
Well, I actually don't think it is okay. I mean, personally, for me, right? I take the stance. If it's legal, I'm not going to complain if you do it. Unless there's some really weird situation. I don't know. There's probably an exception. Weak fish, I will not keep a weak fish again unless it won't revive. I actually stopped targeting them. But interestingly enough, the recruitment on those is positive for this, I think, the third year in a row.
Correct. So numbers are looking a lot better. Right?
They are looking better. So I have hope for those. That was my grandfather's favorite fish to go for. We used to go blue fishing, and his favorite thing was when you found the blues, you had to get under them because that's where the weak fish were, offshore. So
and they just fight a totally different way too.
Oh, they do.
They kind of fight like freshwater trout. They just and then once you set the hook, they just immediately start running.
They're gone.
We used to get them up. We used to climb down on the icebreakers, the last bridge going into Long Beach Island on the road going in there. We would pull off and park at the restaurant underneath. We would walk all the way up on top of the bridge, and cut the locks on the icebreakers and go all the way down. And we'd get down there for outgoing tide. And I mean, we had weak fish down there that this was before, I guess, most people started using braid. So we were still using mono, and some of them were just so big. As soon as you immediately set the hook, they just bite right through the line with the fangs.
Yeah.
I'd love to see those days come back. Maybe if they keep it at one fish limit and, people start throwing some of those smaller ones back, we'll see those days again. But
yeah,
unfortunately, I think those really, really good weak fish days, I don't think we'll ever see that again. But, if you could bring back a stock where, hey, let's go out and see if we can get a couple weak fish tonight and actually target them and actually get a couple instead of just like incidental catches in between bass or flounder, that'd be great because that's a great fish to catch.
Yeah.
See, now we did have those nights in the spring with the weak fish. There was a good solid week that's really all we were catching out on the jetties. Nice. I did see a lot of fish go home, but I don't even know why people keep them. They don't taste good to me, but
I think they taste okay, but they don't keep at all. Like you need to eat it immediately.
Right away. Right.
Yeah. You don't want to freeze that. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure somebody's figured out a way to do it. They have a great fight. I'll throw them all back. I actually prefer to now instead of weak fish, I actually try to target specks and reds up here. They're really, really hard to get. They're here. They're really hard to get and hard to find, but that's kind of what I've been doing. And actually I came up empty on both in New Jersey this year. I've caught some further south in Maryland, but not up here. But but that's the way that I look at it. So back to the keeping them and letting them go. I'm not big on keeping a lot of fish. I do keep flounder, but I don't keep my limit all the time. And I do throw back a really good percentage of the keeper size, especially some of the bigger ones. There's nothing better than catching your limit, meaning whatever you planned on keeping for the day, and then throwing back a 24, 25 incher.
Absolutely.
You see the 18-inch sitting on your stringer and you're like, all right, you're going back and I'm going to look for you next year. Love that.
Yeah. And, it's why Ed brings up, the spring and, the spring this was probably one of the better springs that there has been in a long time, especially for bass. I mean, May and June was just ridiculous. The size of the fish, the amount of fish, just an enormous amount all up and down the beach. But I'm just not a crowd guy. I don't like to fish around a lot of people. And, again, I stayed back and on the side and I did really good back there. 40, 45, 50-inch fish. That's a trophy fish anywhere. But I was getting them, 10 inches shy.
Let's show some.
10 inches shy in the back. And nobody around. Most of the pictures I take are selfies because there's nobody, with me. Once in a while, I'll have somebody there that can get a nice shot.
Yeah.
But, so that one right there, that was the first one 3 years ago in July. A buddy of mine was out with me and we fished for a couple hours from right around dawn. Tide wasn't high enough yet. And he said, I'm going to go down the road for a while. And I stuck it out 10 minutes later, back to back 37 inches. But yeah, and all those fish are showing there. They're probably not even 15 minutes apart from each other. It's funny. Some of those pictures, I don't remember where they were because my selfies I just will not burn a spot. That's actually a fantastic bass right there. That was a surf caught bass on a local beach last fall. This was the end of May this year. That was a 37-incher on the side back there.
Yeah.
On that, Spook.
That to me is like the cool thing because you talk to a lot of people and they would swear you can't catch that on the sod, but you do. It's just that most people are just back there dunking bait thinking that they're going to be picking those up, but that's not how they're behaving when they're back there.
So, and this one, and this one right here was August in one of those tornado warnings right there. That was a 32-incher. That was on the beach down here this fall. Last fall, everybody said, "Oh, there's no beach." They're replenishing. Well, I lucked out and didn't luck out, but I kept reading the beach and found some cuts that didn't look like anywhere else, and they were loaded with fish, especially speckled trout were there too. And this was the biggest one I got this summer. It was 98 degrees. I wish you could see like how wet my shirt was, but I was soaked. That's 2:30 in the afternoon, and that's a 37-incher on a Hydro Minnow, top speed in 2.5 feet of water. Crazy.
Well, yeah, and I love how you blur the background there.
And it's a shame because it's such a better picture without that blur.
Right.
But
that's for you.
Yeah. When you don't blur it and you're a local, Some people still won't realize where it's at, but yeah, I mean, I know that I'm not going to, front from it. I know years ago I looked at people's pictures and said, man, I'm zooming in, I'm looking at this little piece of grass here. What does this condo look like? And then you go on Google Maps and listen, if you look hard enough, you can figure out where it's at. But that's one of those spots there where I'm just not in a position to give that spot up. And, it doesn't always produce, but for me, midsummer, I can still get spring-size fish in the summertime when the conditions are right. So that's definitely a fantastic spot.
That's a beautiful fish too, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that one and another one, like there's no broken lines on those fish at all. I don't whether they were migrating early or whatever the case was, but they definitely were not riverborne fish. That was in the surf last year too. Yeah, we found some specks mixed in. We found a big redfish mixed in.
Yeah.
You see a lot of smaller ones out front, or you see the bigger ones that people take on bait. But it was I didn't catch it. I was a block down. I was with Lee and Seth Wakefield. And
was it Seth that caught it?
Of course it is. Why would it be anybody else? And it was a legit like 28 to 30 incher. That was just a beast of a bass right there. November last year, same place on the beach. That's Back Bay. I think that was November last year. I was still getting them on topwater in November. That's May of, I think, 4 years ago. I went up in the surf earlier in the night. Wind was too bad. It was all weedy. Met my buddy back in the bay, and Mag Darters were the ticket. So
let's talk about that real quick. So one thing that I'm noticing is you're using the larger baits or the larger lures in the back. You're not using
Correct.
Spook Juniors, are you? Yeah, let me change the screen up real quick so people can see this.
The regular size. This is the same. So it's a regular size, the saltwater edition ones. But these are the same ones I target like world-class tarpon with when I go on vacation. So, and you can see, I mean, it's just like tour to hell. I've caught so many fish on this plug, but no, I don't shrink down at all. The same thing like with the Hydro Minnow. The same size I use in the surf, I use in the back. This is a smaller Yo-Zuri Hydro popper, but it's still 1 ounce, 4 inches, but they make a 5.5 inch, I think it is. And we were actually catching more on that than on this one. Yeah, I think a lot of people scale down, the tactical angler one, the crossover popper. But no, I think the assumption is hey, the bay always holds smaller fish. In some regards, they're not quite as big as out front, but if you want big fish, listen, these Northeast jigs, my guys there have been so generous to me over the last couple of years. I mean, these are lights out all year round. But if I'm going to go for big fish, I've learned to throw bigger plugs and they'll produce. I mean, you got to remember how big the mouth is. And even if you're using a 6 or an 8 inch plug, you got a fish with a mouth this big. What's a 6 or an 8 inch plug? They just inhale it. So especially when you could find some adult bunker coming through the side banks in the early spring, you want to throw a plug that's that size. You start throwing those little dink ones that won't even give them any notice. Topwater plugs are the same way. The bigger wake that I'm causing, the more commotion. That seems to be what they follow. So small lures in the back are just in the river early on when it's still cold. I'll use smaller lures, but once the water starts to warm up, no, I don't scale down. So not at all.
We are getting some questions flowing through. I don't know if you want to shoot through them. James is asking, Chris, do you always use artificials? And I think we know that answer.
Yes, correct. Yeah, I haven't used bait or live bait in probably 4 years. The last time I used live bait was when we had that big bluefish run in Atlantic City, I guess 2016, where it was just every day it was 10, 15 pounders, and I was using chunks. But then once they started hitting plugs, we went right to plugs. But for bass though, I don't eel fish. I know that eels are great for big bass, and that was the big bite this year in certain areas was the eel bite. But and again, I hope nobody takes my perspective as hey, he's cracking on certain guys where that's just not the way I enjoy to fish.
Right.
I enjoy, Chris Balaban, who owns Tight Lines in Summers Point, we had a conversation a couple months ago, and he said, he phrased it exactly the way, hope he didn't copyright this, but this is exactly the way you look at it. You create a strike when you use an artificial. You create that strike. When you use live bait or stick bait, it's not that way. You create that strike, so the strikes are more ferocious, and to me, it's more rewarding. But no, it's artificial for me. Even when the water's 40 degrees in the back, or if it's a really really cold winter and March 1st comes, I don't throw bloodworms. I get them on artificial year round. So
yeah, and look, it's all of what you prefer, right? We had Bayside Dave on. He's a bait.
Right, exactly.
Very successful.
Yep, successful. Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Listen, there's a lot of missed opportunities probably where I don't catch because I don't do the bait thing, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Because
again, it's more rewarding for me personally, the way I fish. Again, it's okay. And I used to fish that way. I mean, and even when I freshwater fish, I still fish that way sometimes. I take my son out, we use minnows, we use shiners, whatever the case is, mill roaches. But when I target bass, I just think it's better strikes, and it's just better for me when I use them this way. It's more challenging. So
yeah, I think it definitely is more challenging. At least it is for me.
And it's versatile. I mean, you got the hydro that goes, down to 2 feet. I mean, I just usually do it right below the surface. The tactical angler crossover popper. I mean, you can do surface, you can do subsurface. The spook for me this year, if I wasn't using spooks this year, I wouldn't have caught probably 80% of the fish that I did. It's crazy how you could throw a popper, they wouldn't touch it, but you threw a spook, and they couldn't stay off of it. That's and that's it's not the easiest. I mean, it took me years to figure out, how to work a spook really, really good. So, you tend to work it too fast, too slow, too much slack in the line, a fast action rod versus a medium action rod. You got to figure it out. But when you can figure out how to work them the right way, especially with finicky fish, that's the go-to lure to go to. You could throw bait in some of those spots all day, or throw something and they won't touch you. You throw that spook across the surface and you got that wake, they can't let it go. So
right now people are writing down their Amazon orders so that they can. I know for me, I have never tried the crossover, so I'd be interested to.
And it's got that. It's got a crazy rattle chamber in it, and it kind of looks like the Yo-Zuri Hydro Popper. It looks like on the face there, but this one, but the TA one, you can work it below the surface too, which is good because you get some of those windy days back on the side, and that they're there. The bass are there, but you just can't get a top water plug to work.
Right,
and
skipping
that will go through right underneath the surface, and you could do that side to side motion right underneath, and it definitely works. But that's a plug that I think a lot of people don't use that way. They just use it on top, and that's it.
Right. You get to see it rather than. I mean, when you're going subsurface, you have to feel. Right. It's a little bit more difficult, a little bit more nuanced than working in topwater. And quite frankly, I would probably do topwater more just because it's easier. I can see what it's doing. I can hear what it's doing.
Addicting.
Yes.
And
so addicting.
And
seeing that blow up.
Correct. And going back to the strike again, for me, when I'm using bait, I'm just standing there, I'm watching the rod or I'm feeling the line. I'm not seeing any type of visual, Well, some of the biggest satisfaction I get out of going fishing is the mental picture that you capture from the experience. So whether it's a topwater blow up striped bass here, or it's going to be, a 70-inch tarpon blow up next week, because it's happening again. Those are what keep bringing me back. Feeling taps on the line, or just oh man, I took my bait, he came off. Again, that's fine for some people. For me, that's not what keeps me going back. That creating the strike, and seeing that wake come up behind it, and you're just waiting. He's coming, and then you stop that plug dead, and they just I ambush it. What's better than that?
Yeah.
Or when they blow up on it and then you have to start working it again and then they get it.
5 times, right? Yeah. And the Spook was great for that this year, where they'd blow up on it all the way out, and 5 times. And just and another thing with these lures, don't give up at the end. A lot of people, they throw them out 3/4 of the way and that's it. I work them all the way to the bank, because they will chase it all the way to the bank, and just, especially if you stop it and just hit it last second. So that's one mistake I made years ago, was like, I like to fish fast. I'm not a slow fisherman. I just have a faster retrieve. But I used to say, okay, well, now I'm out of the target area, so let me just get it in real quick and let me cast again. You can wake them up in the target area, and then they'll follow it out of the target area.
Yep. They'll
hit it right at the bank. And that's definitely one mistake I made for years. I don't make anymore. I work it all the way in. So.
And hold the rod tight, because when they strike it right at your feet, it feels 10 times harder than when they strike 30 yards out and rip it right out of your hands.
Yeah. Drag setting, it all comes into play. It's not, I had a surf bass I lost 2 weeks ago, and that was because of my drag setting. I wasn't expecting, because we hadn't had a good surf down here this year. I know up north it's been, on and off, but down here it's been poor, to say the least. But I had a really, really nice fish hooked on. He got down in the rip, and I didn't back my drag off enough, and he spit the hook. And I'm sure that's probably one of the better bass that I'll have an opportunity to catch this fall. And I kind of lost that opportunity. But the drag setting and having a good solid reel, that's another important thing, is just the equipment. You got to have equipment that's going to stand up against, a 15 or a 20-pound fish in the back blowing up last second. Because I've had them where, they'll rip the drag right out of the reel, or, you'll crack your reel sheet or something. You have to be prepared for it, and you have to hold on tight. No doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a question. I want to do this question from Bill. Bill is actually the one that rescued Derek and I and got us back to our trucks this weekend.
Nice. So he gets extra questions then.
Yeah, he can send a text and have anything answered that he wants. Okay. So if you only go out for an hour or so, what are the optimum conditions that point to that hour to fish?
So for me, I have a couple different side locations that the same tide doesn't work on all of them. So if I know which, all right, let me figure the best way to explain this. So for me, it's usually outgoing tide, but certain parts of that tide depend on what bank I'm on. Some banks, I definitely need a moon phase to be happening to get a certain water height to bring fish up on those flats, because it's a real shallow flat. But then the water's going to run out really, really fast once the tide turns. So, some of those spots, it's a 25 to a 30-minute window. There's other spots where, you maybe have an hour or two. So to me, you got to look at the moon. You got to look at the wind, because if you have an outgoing tide and you have a wind pushing that water out, I've had it where, I've gone one day and I've been waist high in water. I'll go back the following day, the same time, same tide, but with a west wind coming 15, 20 miles an hour, and that water's already blown out. So really, it's just, you got to know what produces on that spot. Because again, some side banks work the same, but my standing facing the north, my standing facing east, standing facing south. So, which direction do I want the wind? A south wind on the side, at least for me, is never good, because it just junks up the bay. It really kicks a lot of bottom up, and it muddies it up. Some banks, I need a northeast wind. Other ones, I need a west wind. And there's some days if I don't get any wind, I just don't go. So you just really got to know that area, and that window it produces. That's what you got to pick it. I'm not trying to beat around the question,
right?
But it really is just depending on how that bank produces.
So let me ask you this. So
all the places I fish, most of those fish all come from less than 3 feet of water. All
Okay,
those
that's
pictures
what I
you
was going
showed,
to ask, because many people, I think, in South Jersey especially, a sod bank means that you're standing and 1 foot in front of you is 12 feet deep.
well, some spots are, but when
That's
I
not
go to
what you're
those,
looking at.
no, because this stuff isn't going to work. I mean, I'm not going to use. I'm not saying it won't work, but I'm not using a Zara Spook in 12 feet of water.
Hmm.
The odds that they're going to come up 12 feet, I assume they will, but
It takes a lot of casting. Yeah, they will.
yeah, it takes a lot of
But it
casting.
takes a
They'll
ton. It
they'll
takes a
come up and get
ton.
it. I mean, I'm going to go and I'm going to use a lead head if I'm going to fish, like that. But no, most of these places I'm fishing, there's some current there. There's flats, and yeah, again, all the bass I hook year round, even when the tide is up, it's no more than waist deep. Sometimes that water's only knee deep. So
Yeah.
trust me, the visuals that you get when you get that strike in water that shallow from, a 35 or 37-inch fish, when he's in 2 feet of water, he's got nowhere to go. And he's just, flapping and flapping and flapping and just trying as fast as he can to find that deeper water. So the first challenge is just finding them. The second challenge is hooking them. The third challenge is to keep them on long enough before the hooks get shaken out and they kind of get their bearings, and now you start fighting them regular, because that whole flipping and flaring that they do in the air, that's where you lose most of the fish at.
Yeah.
Spooks, it's not a great thing that they have, 3 hooks, and sometimes I remove, a set of them or whatnot. Sometimes I'll go with just one set in the front. But, when they start flapping around, then they can get a lot of hooks in them and whatnot. But, when you fish in the shallow water, yeah, it's a lot of it is, it's a small window based on just that fact.
Right.
That water is not going to be there for very long. So, you got to look at your schedule and say, hey, I'm going to have to give this up today, or I'm going to have to change my plans around, because if you miss that window, you miss it. So there's a lot of things in life that I give up at certain times of the year to go out and get on these bites. But that's what you have to do. You could go to the same bank that I leave an hour later and stand there for the next really 23 hours and not get a touch.
Right.
Some of them are just so tidal and wind dependent.
So I imagine you're catching a lot of bluefish in the spring when they're coming through, because they're coming through the same spots.
Well, not the last couple of years. So,
no.
Right. So going back to like 16, 17, 18, well, even well before that. Yeah, the same spots where I was getting bass, I was getting gator blues, and that was 16 and 17 was really great. And again, I did that years ago, but I'm talking, just the last couple of recent years. But yeah, I mean, I was getting 15-pound bluefish mixed in with those bass on flats of water less than 3 feet on topwater. So crazy. And I've hooked in the ones that, at least one that I've lost, that had to have been pushing 20 pounds. And after, 12 or 14 minutes, I had that fish, 3 feet in front of me. And I could just see like the last treble was in his mouth. I knew if he shook it one more time, that was it. And spit it out at me, and that's it. But yeah, when we used to get the gators to come back there, was really good. A few of them passed through here or there, but yeah, they're same spots, no different.
Yeah.
You just, a lot of times it's just the time of day too. Some days, people say, oh, you can't get bass in the middle of the day.
Sure you can.
It's just not true. I mean, I think that for me, certain times of year, tide dependent is more important than light. Sometimes, some parts throughout the year, it's definitely a dawn, dusk, or a cloudy day bite. But no, definitely you can catch big fish during the day. You just have to know where to go and what the presentation is going to be, and be patient. You go 10 minutes, there's nothing here. Because you know what? That current starts kicking in the next 5 minutes, or that wind starts to pick up and puts a little chop. You could go from having nothing to, a lights out outing. So just got to wait it out just a little bit.
Yeah, I think they're there more than people realize. They just assume because they didn't hit their 2 lures. Well, I imagine that in your bag you have a ton of different options and multiples of each when you head out there. So you're cycling through until you're finding what's working, and then you're probably saying, well, conditions changed, I'm going to go back to the start.
So definitely multiples of each. And I ran into that problem the other day where I lost a hydro minnow and I didn't have another one with me, but I had three more out of my garage. And I usually don't make that mistake.
Yeah.
No, I usually bring at least two or three variations of the same thing. I'm not really big on the color. I actually like white and clear better than any of those. The other colors are kind of pretty looking and they're, nice. I have a lot of custom plugs from friends that are plug makers, and those plugs look great. The craftsmanship are fantastic. I'll probably never throw them because a lot of them don't throw well anyway unless you're out in a boat. But no, I usually bring two or three poppers, a couple Zara Spooks, a couple subsurface, and a bunch of plastics, because there's just there's some days where they don't want to touch a plug, they want plastics. There's other days where they don't want plastics, they want plugs. I don't usually get caught shorthanded out there, because again, some of these side banks I'm walking 15 or 20 minutes in.
Better have everything.
Yeah, full waders, mosquitoes, greenheads, mask on, spray. I mean, you're just getting kind of tore alive, but at the end of the road, hopefully what's waiting for you, and extra leaders, extra TA clips. Because again, I've been in those positions where I've been on a side bank or waist deep in the river, and you're trucking through the mud like, oh my God, I just got broken off, and now here we go again. I'm walking back. So whether it's now I carry not just one bag but a couple bags, plastics in one, plugs in another, a really really good belt, so I don't have to put a shoulder bag on anymore, so I don't have that pressure on my neck or whatnot. I just keep everything on the waist, and definitely no shortage of gear when you go out there now.
Yeah, well, Ed can tell you, I was out with him tog fishing and I ran out of jigs. Luckily, I was with the tog jig maker, and he said, "Get over here." And
knowing how often you get stuck with that too, right?
Yeah.
And how they dive down and fish and all that structure, and that's another fish. I hope that years from now we're not having the same conversation about tog as we do.
We will. I think we absolutely
because
will.
I don't think anybody thought years ago we'd have
Bluefish.
This discussion about bluefish or about sea bass. I remember as a kid coming down on vacation in Ocean City with my parents for the summer, and we'd go back to 12th Street Fishing Pier on the bay in Ocean City, and we just we use squid, and we're catching, at the time you think they're small, but these sea bass that are 15, 16, 17 inches long, really really fat, and it's like but that's not really the objective fish are back there. If, we were trying to catch some bass or bluefish or big sand sharks at nighttime back there. But now, sea bass, it's like, what is that? I don't even see them anymore. So I'm hoping tog's not going to be the same way. But again, all the hoopla that gets put into tog fishing on social media, I don't know.
So I think I've kept one this year. It's funny. I threw back. I've been throwing them back. So I threw back one the other day on Saturday. My buddy caught the same fish right after that, and I have video evidence of it. It was the same exact fish. Caught it within 20 minutes, which tells me, to me that was not only cool because he caught the same fish, but it was cool because it didn't care. It was back eating crabs. It was about 20 minutes later. And it was about maybe 15 yards from where I caught it the first time. And so to me, look, catch them. If you want to go out and fish for them, catch them. And if you throw them back, they're probably going to be pretty good,
Yep.
And that was just evidence, because it had a big Captain Hanks hook right through its face 20 minutes earlier, and it just didn't care. And actually, another good example of it, on Instagram, there is an account called Drum Spots, and it shows where one redfish is caught multiple times. They show that all the time. You can tell because of the spots, and they show the dates. They show the dates, and within a week they're just caught multiple times. We're talking big, 40 inches down there.
Right.
But I'm afraid that tog's going to go the same way, though. I'm afraid sheep's head's going to come right behind it, just as they're starting to establish themselves. So we'll
and the sheep's head thing, that's another, that's such a great fish, and I think a lot of people didn't even know that they were up here
Yeah.
until a couple years ago. And I obviously I think they're a little bit harder to catch than tigers, or it takes a little more effort to a little more effort to catch those and kind of locate them. But yeah, I mean, listen, social media is great because it gets, we get to do things like this, and I've met so many nice people, and you get to connect, I mean, I have that page, and I post a lot of pictures. I do a lot of stuff on Instagram, and but I'm proud of the fish I catch. I'm proud of the bites that I find. I'm proud of the strikes that I create. It makes me happy. That's that's one of my things in life. It's not just a stress relief like it is for some people. It's so rewarding. I was with my son in the truck tonight, and we were going to Wawa to get a sandwich, and nature sounds in my SUV. It's like one of the things that you can pick. And he's like, "Dad, leave this on. Don't even put the radio on." And like just hearing like all these nature sounds in the background was like, he was like, "Wow, that sounds like really cool, Dad." And I said, "This is what happens when we go fishing." He goes with me sometimes. We do like the freshwater gig, but that's the experience for me. Is just the hearing, the seeing. It's not just the fishing and the catching. Like that's a big part of it, but just that whole experience for me. I was up on a local beach a couple weeks ago with two buddies of mine, and a woman was up there taking pictures. And it's funny because I was joking to my friend. I said, "Oh, I wonder if she's taking pictures of the sunrise or she's taking pictures of us." So she came down to us and said, "Hey, I hope you guys don't mind. I'm taking some photos, art teacher, and I wanted to show my students pictures of fishermen." So I'm like, "Okay, sure, shoot away." So she takes like all these pictures. Most of them, were just, I think one picture we posed for. The rest of them, she's just kind of taking pictures at will. So I gave her my number before I left, and she sent me a couple of them when just really, really good shots. Today, I get a text message from the same woman, and here I guess she teaches a painting class, and one of her students painted one of those photos. So
that's pretty cool.
She's going to have the girl sign it this week, and she's going to get it to me. But it is like when you put the two together, you can't even tell the difference between the real photo and what this girl just drew. But like even that day, there was so much weed on the beach, we didn't catch anything. But it was just such a rewarding experience to be out there with those guys who also don't keep anything, just true sportsmen. They just love everything about the sport. And, we had that happen to us that day, and it just made it rewarding even without catching any fish. So
I think the salt air has a lot to do with it. Once that air hits you, it's just like everything fades away.
And plus, and any bass caught in the surf down here is a special fish because of how much work you have to put into it nowadays.
Well, so let's jump into the surf real quick. Got a couple questions about that. Let me put this one up there. Can you provide thoughts on surf fishing techniques for November and December?
So last year was probably one of the best falls I've had in 15 years down here. And it was, again, it was all artificials. I didn't use any bait, Yo-Zuri plugs. That Hydro Minnow was fantastic. Actually, believe it or not, and no lie, the Hydro Minnow never came off last fall. Every single fish, other than one fish I caught in a bucktail because it was really, really rough one day, every single fish last year came on that white Hydro Minnow. So, but again, when you're fishing the surf, it's just like in the back. You got to know how to read the beach. You got to look for structure. A flat beach, a freshly replenished beach is not a good beach. So we're definitely not looking for that. But, if you kind of follow suit with what goes on up north and, you look for troughs, you look for rips to form, to me, you kind of go at a lower tide and you can see what the structure is. Because when you're out there at high tide, everything looks the same. You can't really see where anything's at. But I learned it by going out on a new moon on a blowout tide. Then I was able to kind of see the imperfections, as to say, in the beach. And, you go back and you fish those areas when there's more water there. And, those areas, at least for me, produce. I just always look for a small stretch of beach that looks so much different than the rest. All the rest that looks the same, everybody else could have that. But that one block or two that looks different, that when I throw my lure out, if I could reel it straight in and I don't feel any resistance, I'm just going to keep moving, keep moving. If it's sweeping to the right or the left, I'm going to keep going that direction, because at some point you're going to find that rip. And usually those are the things I work, and that's where I get fish sitting. So but it's that way for any beach. Again, whether it's here, it's not giving away anything. I'm sure there's a couple of my friends listening are like, oh man, why are you saying that? Why? It's not listen, you can look up any on the water video or report, how to read beaches. And, you just look for a section of beach that's different from the rest and has the most water flow. And, that tends to be where they're going to set. And again, some guys will argue with me, no, the sun can't be out. You got to be out there in the dark. Not one of those bass last year I caught in the dark. I don't have any luck, at least the last 2 years, when it's completely dark. Most of those bigger ones were right at sunrise and not at first light. So as soon as I can really see where the lure is hitting the water, that's when I had the most luck. But yeah, just find those different beaches, stretch of beach that looks different from the rest, and you'll find those bass there.
Yeah, I think a big thing is, I say this for flounder fishing. I look for things that are different.
Yep.
And if the water at the top is different than what the water right next to it, that means something's different on the bottom, which means structure, which means whether you're on a kayak and you have a fish finder or a boat, or you're on the sod or the beach,
right,
you should check it out, right? And see what it's doing, because it's those areas that are different that are usually going to have the different currents, and it's going to push the bait fish through. It's going to sweep the forage through that area. Yep. And it's always worth a look. It's always worth a look, at least for a moment. Toss the plug in there a few times and see what you can get. And they're usually pretty active if they're sitting there, in my experience.
Correct. Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going to be sitting in the current. They're going to be sitting somewhere without the current, so they're resting a little bit.
So last week when I was out, wasn't an ideal tide, but to my right, wasn't getting anything in front of me, but to my right, I could see it was definitely within casting range, and I could see the way the waves were breaking, kind of rolling over a sandbar. And, there was some kind of turbulence being created there. And I said, man, that's a prime spot. First cast in that spot there, there she was right there. It's just, same thing. Again, we could talk about the freshwater fishing again and freshwater trout fishing. When you catch fish in those heavy current, not even really heavy current, but just some type of current. Yeah, they're a lot more active. There's a lot more oxygen flowing through that water.
Yeah.
They're just a lot more energetic, and that's still, an ambush point, right on the edge of a sandbar, whether it's on the inside edge of the bar or the outside edge of the bar. The wave comes in, pushes bait in, gets washed up. That's a prime opportunity for them to go up and feed. But, and same thing with the surf. A lot of people, it's not high tide, I can't go. I don't really get a whole lot of fish at high tide. Just a little hint there.
So again, I'm traveling 2-3 hours. I'll get them at any tide, but I think I have to work a lot harder. If I'm there and it's high tide, I'm fishing it. Yeah. But I have different spots that I go, during those tides. Typically it's deeper water stuff. There's not as much top water going on, but it's the slack tides that I think are the most difficult for really any kind of ambush predator like striped bass. But here's another question. So I think you answered this kind of top 3 things you look for when picking a spot in the back. So I think you already talked about it with the surf, looking for the changes in the water pattern and the structure. What are the other 2 that you would add in there?
Current, wind, and depth of the area I'm fishing. I think those are the 3 most important things. And if we want to say 4, I'd say the moon phase, because moon absolutely plays such a huge factor into locations in the back, because the water can fluctuate, sometimes 3 feet from, just a nonsense moon phase to a super high one in the spring. But again, a lot of people shy away from that because now the areas that they're accustomed to fishing are now under, water that's almost chest high. I'm willing to go out in that and trek through it to get where I need to go. But, because at some point on outgoing tide, that water is going to push out. And if you have some wind to help it, it's going to push out pretty fast. But I don't usually do good if there's no wind. Too much wind, I'd rather have that than not have enough wind, because I can go to a spot where the wind at some point is going to be, blowing against my back, or not as bad of a crosswind where I could still get, some kind of target angle to cast at. But yeah, those are the couple things you need to look for, I think. And bait, obviously. I mean, if we're talking late summer, early fall, and the mullet, have started to do their thing in the back, you definitely want to target around where those mullet are at, because bass are just going to key in on those, especially when there's a baby bunker in the back. I don't really pay attention to those. The bluefish can kind of have those, but I want to target on those mullet. And early spring, same thing. If there's adult bunker back there, some of those other factors may not matter as much, because if they could get those, get that bait pinned in, you could have whatever kind of condition going on, but if they got the bait pinned in, that's a key factor. So,
it's interesting you say that the peanut bunker is not. I don't even look at that anymore, because there's just so much of it out there.
I can't find any bass on peanut bunker. And again, maybe it's just the select areas I go, but yeah, I actually don't even like when I see them back there, because it almost turns off the bite for me. When I don't see a lot of bait, I've had some of my best days, because those resident bigger bass are, they stay in these certain areas for a certain amount of weeks at a time. And if there's not a whole lot of bait coming through, and you throw that big plug coming through there, they just, they're hammered at top speed because they're hungry. They got to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Diesel, he wants to know, what do you feel about pencil poppers?
I use them in the surf on calmer days, but it's been a little tough down here this fall with the wind to throw a pencil. But I throw them in the back too. There's a lot of spots that I fish that are very, very shallow, but then there's a huge drop off at some point out there, and you can see some activity out there. And for whatever reason, the wind's not pushing them in, or the bait just isn't moving, those fish will not move. So there's no doubt I'll throw a 2-ounce pencil back off the side bank and work it. Yeah. It's a little tough when you got a 7.5-foot rod.
Right.
But there's enough plug makers out there now that make smaller pencils. I have some that are like 1.5 ounces. They'll cast like a rocket, and you still get really, really good action out of them. It's a little tiring on the arm on a fast action rod, because I use a pretty stiff one, because I can throw like up to 4 or 5 ounces with that rod. I use it out front. I use it in the back. It's just shy of 8 feet, a Jig and World Nexus rod.
Okay.
So using pencils are a little tough at times, but yeah, I throw pencils in the back. You see bird activity, you see bait activity, and you can't reach it. A pencil may be the only thing to get it. So I always throw some kind of slim pencil in my bag. I always bring that.
So okay. And I think you're probably like me. You'll throw topwater at any time of the day. Or do you?
I'll throw it at night.
Yeah.
I'll throw it at night. I mean, if I hear some action going on, I mean, if there's some lights around, or if it's a full moon and I can get some light on the water, obviously it's going to be better. But yeah, if I hear action going on, absolutely I'm going to throw that, because listen, they'll come up and they'll bite metal lips like crazy at nighttime. So yeah, a popper or even a spook works slower. Yeah, no doubt. It doesn't matter the time of day, nighttime, middle of the day. I always throw topwater first from the middle of April until November. And obviously if I'm not getting anything, then I'll go subsurface, but you'll never catch a time where I go out where I don't have a topwater plug on there to start with, because I'm not going to pass up that topwater opportunity to get that strike and that visual picture to give it up for a subsurface lure. No.
Yeah,
it's too addicting. You can't give that up.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, that's what it's all about.
Well, Ed,
that's why you topwater fish.
Ed, you're throwing topwater first, also, aren't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You can't do it any other way.
My best day came on fishing a spook.
Yep.
I'd look at it this way, and Bill was asking that question in the chat. I think it's a myth that they don't bite after a certain time on topwater. I think that it just means that you didn't move spots when the conditions changed. Well, It got light out and the bite turned off. Well, it turned off there, move. Of course, they're not going to be there now. It's a light out. They're going to move to this other spot. But I think the top waters are outstanding to start with. Yes, I'm also addicted to the blow up and seeing it. You get the full experience. You get all the senses in there, right?
Yep.
But I think it's also because the most aggressive fish are going to go after the most aggressive presentation, and that's a top water. It's making the most noise. It's throwing off water up top. It's the easiest for them to see, and that's the one that you want to get. So I think you should always start with the top water. I do fish them at night. I will fish them in a new moon. It doesn't matter. I'm going to try them, and I've caught at all times with it. And yes, it is the most intense. I mean, you don't see people, posting just a quick video. Look at this underwater blow up. Oh, look at how the rod bent when I set the hook. No, they're showing the top water. That's what everyone's clicking on because that's what everybody wants to get.
And there's got to be something to drive you to go back. I mean, if every fish you missed was on a subsurface lure, I don't know if the reaction, the self-reaction would be the same. But I mean, when you're, you miss some really, really big fish on top, or if they don't even commit and you just see the wake, that's enough to, get me to, there's days, I'll go 4, 5, 6 days in a row when the bite's that good. The top water, even if it's really rough, like I said, this past spring, I mean, we were, the smaller Yo-Zuri wasn't doing it when the wind picked up. So my buddy went out, he's like, hey, you know what, we're going to throw these 5-inch ones. And, they were withstanding, almost whitecaps back there. And, we'd, 32, 35-inch bass just busting out of the water at them and, some crazy wind. But yeah, I always throw it first. I never throw subsurface first. It doesn't matter. Even if I know the opportunity probably isn't going to present itself on top, I still will always throw that top water lure because I've seen stranger things happen. But one thing I won't do is when a really, really hot day, I won't spend a lot of time throwing that top water. I'll throw it for a little bit. And if maybe 10 casts, I don't get anything to commit, then I'll go underneath the surface where if it's dawn or dusk, I'll go 40 minutes or an hour, just wait, I'll stick it out with that type of presentation. But when it's warmer out, I mean, I'll throw it a little bit, but then I'll go underneath the surface. I won't do it as long. So. Right.
I think top water too is a good search bait. You get a visual representation of where you're casting along that bank. So, okay, I've tried this whole area top. I can go, subsurface, or I can move areas or whatever. And at least for me, that's how I attack it sometimes.
It's kind of like using a crankbait for freshwater, for largemouth bass fishing. It's a great fish locator. Like you said, Rich, they're aggressive fish. That's really what I target too. I don't target fish that are really not ready to strike. I mean, I create the strike with the lure, but it's an aggressive strike. So fish that are kind of just hanging out and just lazy or whatever, I'm probably not going to catch those fish because I'm not fishing a method to really kind of attract them. But that top water presentation, that's going to bring the most aggressive fish. And I've had it where I'm not even like to my spot yet, but I could kind of see something happening and I'll just wing it from, maybe like another 50 or 70 feet away. And as soon as it hits the water, you just pop it once but you're not going to get that with a different lure. You're just not going to get the same reaction. If you're throwing, a quarter ounce or a half ounce plastic tail, it's not going to be the same way. They may hit it instantly when it hits the water, but that's a totally different type of strike. When you're talking, as soon as the plug hits the water, and either you don't even have a chance to crank it, or you just pop it once, and you get that crazy explosion. To me, there's just no comparison.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree with that. I mean, that's what it's all about for me. I mean, you see one big fish hit or come up, and that's the other thing. You get a good sense of the size of it too, and what you just missed.
Right.
if you don't hook up.
Right. And when you're fishing in areas where, there's some adjacent current or there's, a rip going through, sometimes you really can't tell the size of a fish when they hit something subsurface down inside there. And when you realize sometimes now it's too late if your drag isn't right,
Right.
or you're not, I've been burned way too many times on that.
Yeah.
But even, tarpon fishing is the same way. I mean, I started catching them a couple years ago on plastics, but then once I caught my first one on topwater, haven't gone back to plastic since. And that spook bite and seeing a 60, 70-inch fish just fly out of the water and engulf it. You can't compare that to anything else in the world.
No.
If I'm live lining a live mullet out there, it's not the same. It's just not the same. The fight may be the same, but the initial strike, and again, that's what it's about for me, is that initial presentation and take. Definitely a league of its own. So,
yeah, I have to agree. Let me ask you this. I want to circle back because there are a couple of people who want to talk a little bit more about the conservation side. But before we end, John Hutchinson, another member of this channel, actually was asking, do the inlets produce at all? What's your thought on the inlets versus surf versus back bays, and how would you fish those?
I think it depends on the time of year. Inlets, again, you got a lot of current going through there, so that's a good thing. You really have to know, what you're doing and where you're standing at and how to fish, again, because you have sandbars, you have rips, you have troughs. So it's not the easiest place to fish, but inlets, when nothing else is producing, they could be lights out. I mean, that's, really kind of the path that fish take when you think about it, to get to the rivers in the spring to spawn. When they leave the rivers to go back out front, they have to come through the inlet again. And when fish are migrating, I can't think of a better place for fish to stop off and, take a bite. There's always current there. So inlets also draw a lot of bait. And we talked about, the bait equals fish equation there. So, yeah, I mean, inlets are a fantastic spot. That's a different way of fishing.
Yeah.
So, but again, some of the lures are the same. You could throw, SP minnows. You could throw, mag darters. You could throw regular darters. Again, if there's a lot of current, you got to get something that's going to stay in that current, because you want to be in that strike zone as long as possible. You don't want to, have it immediately get swept, because if the fish are sitting there, in the current, regardless of the direction they're facing, if you're getting swept right away, you're not even getting that fish an opportunity. So, mag darters for me are a great lure to fish in heavy current. But again, that's something that you need to get out there and really look at for the time of year. I don't do good in inlets in the summer, but the fall used to be a really good bite in the inlets down here. I don't think it is really so much, but we can look at Absecon Inlet this past spring.
The spring was insane.
So if we want to talk about how inlets produce, you just got to look back at the videos posted from this past spring. I mean, Ed and a lot of my other friends that fish Atlantic City, I mean, these guys were just it was just total insanity over there. I mean, yeah, it's, and again, I pass up a lot of nice fish because I don't get involved with the crowds. It's just not comfortable for me. But the people that are willing to get in the middle of that, when you got some nights, a dozen or 20, 40 to 50-inch fish that are being caught. So that tells you right there the inlets do produce. But
it's a different game, though, right? I mean, it's
totally different.
The bottom.
It's different gear. It's different setups. You really can't take a lot of your back bay equipment out there because, again, you may have even a smaller window in an inlet to fish, because 1 minute you may have hardly no water between your knees and your ankles, and then 20 minutes later, now you're waist high, and now the water that you walked in to get to where you are is now overhead. So the only thing I would tell people when it comes to that is either go with somebody who knows what they're doing, or find an inlet that has rocks, because to
Yes.
just do it on the sand is a totally different way. And I don't think we're going to have that conversation here, but if you're going to do it on the rocks, yeah, absolutely. Spring is fantastic for inlets. So.
Yeah, I actually, we can circle this back around. Just wanted to go through a couple of the comments about the conservation side. I was in Absecon Inlet, but I was kayak fishing this spring, and guy pulled in a huge bass. I mean, he was going crazy, he and his buddy, and
Right.
they pulled it in, and I'm like, that's too big. That's way too big. So they were right off the side, and I said, how big is it? They said, we don't know. We don't have anything to measure it. So I said, well, I got a bump board. So I went over to them real quick thinking, God, let them get it back in the water. And I handed it to them knowing that it's way over my bump board, which only goes to 36 inches. And I was like, how big is it? And they said, well, it's bigger than the board. And so I lifted myself up. I stood in the kayak and I'm looking down. I was like, dude, that's a 50-incher. And they started cheering. I said, you got to throw that back. That's too big. You got to let it go. And they started looking at each other. I was like, I know it's going to happen. I said, just give me my board back. They handed it back. I'm like, I'm just telling you right now, you get caught with that, it's a big fine. Everyone's going to know your name. And man, they hammered it, just took off, kept the damn thing. But that was in Absecon Inlet.
Yep.
But you got to keep in mind when fishing these inlets, the first of all, the currents are great, but they can be too much.
Dangerous too. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, they're definitely dangerous. Yep. They can be too much for the fish. I mean, you need to remember, think about where they would go to get the bait, where the bait's going to get swept, but also remember that these fish can't go to the grocery store. So if they're going to eat, they have to expend their calories to get their meals. So they're not going to want to sit in a 5-knot current. They're going to find where the bait's coming through. They're going to go back further into the back or out front to where that 5-knot current or 4-knot current is down to a 2-knot current, which is still pretty good. I mean, it's still pretty strong. You're not swimming out of that, and they're going to wait there because it's much less effort for them to get those bait fish that are being swept through. So always keep that in mind with the inlets. Keep in mind also, Absecon Inlet gets to 50 feet deep. Hereford Inlet gets down to 60 feet deep.
Yep.
So it's a whole different game. You're not throwing a top water as effectively in an inlet as you are right where the inlet dumps into the back bays or right around the jetties that border those inlets. So you just got to fish them differently.
Yeah,
but to the conservation,
it's a whole different experience. A whole different experience. So just got to be careful when you do it. So
yeah, and if you do decide you're not going to go on shore and you go in a boat or a kayak, just be extremely careful. Bad things happen quick in inlets. So let's just pull it around to just a couple more things before we go. I think we're a little over an hour and a half. So we can always ask Chris to come back and talk more.
I could do this every night of the week. So
well, so could I. So could I.
Do this every night of the week, man. This is fantastic stuff. Yeah.
My son would probably rebel. He just got back from soccer practice and is very quietly making his dinner, giving me the eye.
So it's funny because I came in my office here and I set up and I have in front of me, I have a wall I have a lot of pictures in here, but I have one wall of my fishing in Punta Cana, and she's like, hey, you should kind of turn around and have that in the background. I said, we'll be here 4 hours if I have those pictures in there.
That's another conversation, which I'd like to have sometime when I see a 6-foot tarpon.
Well, we could talk about that when I get back because I leave. I'll already be down there this time next week. So when I get back from that, I'm sure we'll have a lot of material to talk about.
Pictures.
Yeah.
Listen, I guarantee you'll have a 50 or a 60 incher, and I'll be there less than 24 hours. I'll have it already. So I'm dialed in.
Forward to it.
There's no failure down there. Failure is not an option. So.
All right, so let's pull this back. So John Davis, who's actually another member of the channel, so he's making the point, and a couple of other people did. They love eating fish, and they'll go out and they'll catch the things that are going to stay within the legal limits. I just want to be clear. My standpoint is you're fine. If you're within the legal limits, I'm not going to complain about that ever on any of these things. And I know John, I fished with John a few times, and yeah, he's keeping, I don't know that he keeps all of his fish, but he is definitely doing it right. And I've seen him release a bunch of fish as well. And then the other point that was brought up, let me just show it here. It might be easier. 3 hours away, get less fish each year. But when he does, he wants to bring some fish home. What's your opinion? I mean, I'll start my opinion, and then Ed, maybe you want to jump in. My opinion is, I don't care if you're 3 minutes away. You know, if you want to bring a fish home, I think you're fine with it. Now, again, I will stress, for me personally, and this is just me personally, and I don't judge anyone else, I'm not keeping a weak fish. I'm not keeping a striped bass. Probably not going to keep a sheep's head. I throw back most of the tog that I catch that are keeper size, but I don't look sideways at anyone that fishes with me that's going to keep the legal limit. Right. I may start to say something if they go every day and they're limiting out. I may say, hey, man, give that a rest.
Right.
You might want to think about it, but I'm still not going to get mad at them. I don't think there's anything wrong with it as long as it's within the laws. And if we don't like the laws as fishermen, we can go out to these meetings and we can work to get them changed. Sure. And not enough of us do that, but that's my own opinion. Ed, what's your thought on that?
I have a very similar thought. I mean, it's your right. It's your legal right to go catch fish. If you want to keep fish, I mean, as long as you're abiding by the rules, I see no problem with it. You know, people that are way smarter, at least on paper, way smarter than us, you know, are modern in this stuff. And they're saying, okay, you can keep this, this, and this. Well, then, you know, go for it.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, I mean, you know, the limits are what they are. And, you know, you guys are right. You know, when somebody's entitled to keep it, then, you know, that's okay for them, you know, but like you said, Rich, like my personal preference is I like seeing them released. I release all mine, you know, except for 1 or 2 fish the last 20 years. And I don't, you know, I don't fault people for that, for keeping, but at the same time, I hear some of the same people complaining when the fishery is decimated and, you know, oh, well, I can't understand the way that is. You know, why is that?
I wonder.
You know, and again, a lot of that is, you know, a lot of it is the back bay down here. A lot of it is from poaching. It's not from people keeping, you know, one bass here or there. And I get the whole point that, you know, the guy that with the question about the whole 3 hours, you know, I can understand that completely. You know, my point of view is that, you know, I'm 10 minutes from here. You know, this is my home. These are my home waters. This is where, you know, we live and breathe this here. And, you know, when I go out year after year and I go to the same spots and, you know, I'm seeing less fish, smaller size, you know, where does that, where do we stop with that? So, you know, but like you said, hey, listen, I respect everybody's opinion and everybody doesn't agree with me. A lot of people do, a lot of people don't. I think it's, you know, split probably 60-40 out there with people that are okay with keeping fish, and then another 40%, maybe it's 30% that, you know, think that, hey, you know, especially striped bass, just kind of release them all, at least for the time being. Like, I support a moratorium. I think that I would be okay with that. But again, I'm okay with that because I release them. I'm sure there's a lot of people that say, hey, you know what, who are you to tell me that you know, you'll make me register for the saltwater license. In some states, you got to pay for that license. And then you tell me I can't keep what I catch. So I totally get that point. I totally understand that. But just for me personally, you know, I just like seeing them released and see them go the other way. You know, I've caught the same fish twice over the summer, stripers up on the flats. And, you know, so that, you know, people that, well, you know, they migrate all the way through. No, there's a lot of fish that's their home waters. And, you know, there's a few spots that I used to go to before that I can't even get a bite now. And they used to be like lights out spots. It's not, oh, well, you know, that the bay changes and they just move elsewhere. And no, I don't believe that for a second, because those other areas, I'm still getting the same, but these other areas, I know that it's been a high profile poaching spot over the years, and guys go back with vans at nighttime and they use shrimp or whatever. They get a bunch of shorts, 16, 20-inch fish, load them up. You know what? You do that for a couple years. Well, you know, now you got a big radius area that, you know, there are no resident fish left in there. So,
and I think a big thing is, you know, it often devolves into a commercial versus rec guy. I don't think it's legit commercial versus legit rec. I think it's commercial poacher versus
absolutely
recreational poacher. And when I say commercial poacher, I don't know that they're selling illegal fish. I just think that I think maybe they're not quite following the bycatch rules, but
Correct.
when it comes down to it, would I support a moratorium? I probably would, but to your point, it's tough to tell people you can't, right? You can't keep.
Yeah. And that's another reason why I kind of fish alone, because, I'm never going to say to somebody, hey, maybe jokingly, if I'm out with a buddy and he wants to keep it, like, you really got to put that back. But a lot of guys that go with, they're not going to try and keep them anyway. But, I just, I don't want to see it. So I just elect to go somewhere else. I'm not going to say, hey, well, if you want to keep fish, you shouldn't be fishing here. No, it's not my right. The law is what it is, and limits are what they are. And if I don't want to see it, then that's a problem for me. And I'll just go somewhere else, which I'm okay with. And, I catch plenty of fish elsewhere, but back to what Ed said, and not to kind of drag out the point, but, you kind of, if you see a certain thing growing up and you're kind of accustomed to a certain way of life, I think that rolls over into the whole keeping fish and spot burning is the same thing. But I think if we didn't have as much spot burning in the back bay, I don't think the catch rates would be kind of what they are either, because I think that the spot burn thing has kind of exposed a lot of not the techniques, but you can't go everywhere and catch them.
Right. So, there's more to it than just the spots.
But when we're talking about exactly, hey, we're here right now, and this is what we're doing, and this is, I just have as a local, I have a problem with that. If I was a visitor, I would be all for that. I'd be like, hey, that's great. Give me all the news. I'm not going to come down here and waste my time. Tell me exactly where to go. But again, when you're a local guy and you're out there just for the sport of it, and you're kind of out there, for peace of mind and to do your thing, and it's kind of like a shit show.
Yeah,
That's got a lot to do with our society too. Everybody's instant gratification and wants to know everything right away. Nobody wants to put the work in anymore. Nobody wants to figure out where these fish are. Nobody wants to. They just want to go drop a line, catch a fish.
Yeah, which I get for some people, but there are others that really are just too lazy to figure it out themselves or listen to what you're telling. Like, I literally on this channel will tell you how to find flounder, but you should do your own work and figure it out, right? You can find your own flounder, but the spot burning is dangerous for conservation, but it's also dangerous for losing access to spots when you're talking about land-based fishing. Like, to me, that is an extremely legitimate point. It gets a little less legitimate when you're on a kayak or a boat. It's just not as important. But man, when you're talking about access to spots and people destroying them, I think it's a big deal. But I think, from my own point, just to draw to a close on the conservation side, I think really the best thing that could happen is not necessarily a moratorium, but getting the conservation officers for striped bass, get them out on the beaches,
Agreed.
Instead of having one in a 50-mile radius for Cape May County and Atlantic County, which is what the guy told me a couple of years ago. There was one of them. It was only him. So he gave me his card and his personal cell. And he said, you can call me anytime, but it may take me a couple hours to get out there because it's just me. But if you had enough of them and they were actually out on the beaches, they were out on the docks, they're out on the piers. If they were out on a boat patrolling the 3-mile line, which I think is the biggest violation, the 3-mile line of wreck fishermen, I think that's where you're going to make the difference. People can hate me for that or not. It's never going to happen anyway, because they were talking millions of dollars that nobody wants to spend.
Taxes are high enough here in Jersey. We can afford to hire some more conservation officers. All right.
I was telling Chris, that's why I can't live that's one of the two big reasons that I can't live in New Jersey is the taxes. I can't do it.
Well, we were supposed to lose that gas tax, a couple months ago, and now gas down here is higher than we've seen it in. I don't know. It's yeah.
Oh, that's a whole different direction than this channel's headed.
Yeah. Well, that's like the Philadelphia wage tax was a temporary tax put in place, I think, in 1920, and it's still there. Once it's taxed, it's never going away.
Exactly.
They don't take away taxes.
No. No, it's free money to politicians. So, all right. With that, guys, thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on. I'd love to have you back on. Love to get out there and fish with you and learn some things from you. You're definitely much more skilled and knowledgeable about the sod game than I am. Although I do have a ton of sod bank experience. I definitely learned a lot from this. So, thank you.
Absolutely. I definitely look forward to fishing in the future. And you know, for people that, you know, it's just you have to put in the commitment. You have to put in the time. You know, Ed touched on the the instant gratification thing, and you know, it's just a lot of time and effort, and it pays off. I mean, it's a fun thing for me to do. It's a great thing that I've come to do, all year round. Well, except for 3 months or 2 months. We're not supposed to.
Right, when we're not allowed.
Striper fish when we're not allowed, right? But no, absolutely. It's, and I encourage, people to get out there and just, give it a shot and just figure out your own bite, because it's much more rewarding when you do that. But, if we talked about a couple of tips tonight and gave out a little info to help people who haven't maybe been catching a lot to catch a few and kind of get hooked on it, that's fantastic. So good stuff.
Great.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on.
You got it. Anytime, guys.
Yeah, thanks so guys. Thanks for checking out the video or the live stream and asking questions. And we'll catch you in a couple weeks. We'll be announcing that next topic shortly. We're still not quite sure which way we're going to go, but we'll let everyone know as soon as we get it all nailed down. And Chris, good luck in DR.
That's going to be your next show when I come back. We're going to talk about that.
I'll do it. I'm sure some people. It's first started to feel like fall and winter this week. I'm sure people are going to want to see some nice warm weather tarpon fishing results coming up.
86 degrees down there right now. So it's game on next Monday night.
You kidding me? I'm sitting in here in my garage with a space heater at my feet, freezing my butt off.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks
so
everyone
much,
for watching.
All right.
We'll catch you on the next one.